Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger, and helping people get scared of various things. And in our Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked. And this is one of these that have scared people recently. And it's such a great shame. It's a book by two of the architects of the Paris Agreement, so they can't how they describe themselves. They were involved in making it come about. And they present in this book two possible futures, not of the present, but of before the Paris Agreement, one in which the Paris Agreement happened, another in which it didn't happen. So it's a great idea for a book. And then the one in which it does happen, and in which we're on, and assuming that we go all the way to achieving well below 2 degrees C, then that's a much nicer world than the world in which it didn't happen. So that's a great idea for a book, but they just got it completely wrong. And I'm just astonished that people who are so obviously good politicians and involved in making this great thing happen, how could they get the science wrong? It's a bit of a mystery to me. And I think it's something. This has come up so much with the journalists for the last 18 months. Now you just think, oh, journalists, they don't really know what they're talking about. These people do know what they're talking about, at least from the political sense. So how did it happen? And I'm kind of coining a word for it. I think it's a kind of poetic approach to climate science. Very involved in the images and the ideas, and not really in evidence-based science, because they're involved in politics and persuading people, and it's just not the way they think, not the way they've been brought up. I mean, to me it just leaps off the page that it's not the science, but to them, they must have spent, you don't brush off a book in a couple of days, they must have spent a lot of time on this book, and yet it's just wrong. So here are the two stories. Without the Paris Accord, the first thing in history is the air. In many places around the world, the air is hot, heavy, and depending on the day, clogged with particulate pollution. Your eyes often water, your cough never seems to disappear. And you think about some countries in Asia where sick people used to wear white masks to protect others, and now you often wear masks to protect yourself from air pollution. You can no longer simply walk out your front door and breathe fresh air. There might not be any. Instead, before opening doors or windows in the morning, you check your phone to see what the air quality will be. And that is what they thought. This is playing completely into, as I say there, this is playing into Trump's big mistake. And on the other side, air is cleaner than before the Industrial Revolution. Most places in the world, the air is moist and fresh, even in cities. It feels a lot like walking through a forest, and very likely it's exactly what you're doing. The air is cleaner than it's been since before the Industrial Revolution. We have trees to thank for that. They are everywhere. I mean, you go and meet Trump. So I would explain, this is what Trump says. At the same time, we're maintaining America's world-class standards of environmental protection. We have some of the cleanest air and cleanest water on Earth. And for our country, the air is right now cleaner than it's been in 40 years. So if Trump reads that book, he'll say, look, we are on that path already. We don't need the Paris Agreement. No, not at all. Nothing is a hoax. Nothing is a hoax about that, talking about the Paris Accord. It's a very serious subject. I want clean air. I want clean water. I want the cleanest air with the cleanest water. The environment is very important to me. So he was talking about the Environment Policy Act. It's the same thing. And the EPA in the United States, they've removed everything about climate change from the official thing, the official main site. And instead they have lots about clean air and clear water. And that's their focus. And so they've just played right into that. How could they do that? How could two experienced politicians who are involved in the Paris Agreement do that? I just don't understand it. As I say, it seems to be this kind of poetic approach. Something to do with poetry. A kind of poetic approach and imaginative approach to these things. But they can't have put it past the science review. They can't have handed this book to someone from the IPCC and said, can you take a look and check that this is okay? So this is an example, even though they were involved so closely involved in this. This is an example of the sort of mistake. In 1952, then this was the last really bad pea super fog, and the worst in London because the population had grown so much. In 1952, the smoke was yellow and acrid smog, and these 4,000 people died and 100,000 made ill. That's by the official government figures of 1952. And people since then think that it's probably more than those figures. So that was not caused by carbon dioxide emissions. The level of CO2 was much less than it is now, and yet 4,000 people died in London, in the UK, in 1952. And this would be happening still to this day if it weren't for the Clean Air Acts. It's not the renewables transition we've done so far would not be enough to stop this. It would eventually, when all the cars are on renewables and there are no power stations left using fossil fuels, then this would no longer, it would stop happening. But we've stopped it already by having Clean Air Acts. You're not allowed to, as they were doing back then, you couldn't just burn coal in open fires in London anymore. That's no longer permitted. And cars have to have catalytic converters. That is more recent. But back then, you had the very first Clean Air Acts. Then after that, it was because of acid rain, and then all sorts of limitations on power stations, and they reduced the amount of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen, various nitrous oxides that they produce, and the soot and so on. And then catalytic converters in 1989 or something, I've got the figure somewhere in my article, then all cars were required to fit catalytic converters in their exhausts in Europe. And this also hugely reduces the harmful effects of the pollution from cars' exhausts. And in Asia, then in parts of Asia, they still have this sort of pollution. The reason is not the CO2, it's because they haven't got Clean Air Acts, not the strict ones that Europe has. And in places like in India and so on, they have cars with exhausts and they're not clean in the way that they are required to be in Europe. And this is the reason why you have so much air pollution, and then you have the stubble burning in the fields. And this has nothing to do with CO2, not at all. And to help to understand why that's nothing to do with CO2, I mean, we're not actually following this path, but one possible path is to produce lots of biofuels. And we don't need to make it from forests, we could make it from seaweed. We could have giant seaweed farms. I've got that, bring that up, the giant kelp. So the potential for carbon capture from giant kelp farming. So this could actually this is a possible way to make our climate carbon negative. And this is off South Korea. And all those little black patches are seaweed farms. And these take up carbon dioxide from the water, and so they reverse acidification of the ocean locally, and then because the ocean has less carbon dioxide in it, it takes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And if we were to cover pretty much all of the ocean gyres with these giant seaweed farms, then we could actually be reducing carbon dioxide levels hugely, and easily be back to where we are now by the end of the century, and lower if we wanted to be. And it would actually pay for itself, but it needs a big investment to get it going. It needs, of course, environment impacts. Anyway, I don't want to talk on and on about the giant seaweed. On paper it seems that it would work very well, but it obviously needs to be scaled up gradually and needs to be looked at carefully. But suppose that we had done that, say 10 years ago, and we'd really gone way out on giant seaweed, and by now large areas of the sea were covered in it, then we could be going carbon negative, and yet at the same time we would be using fossil fuels, not fossil fuels, we're using giant seaweed, processed giant seaweed as the fuel in our cars, and it would be carbon negative fuel, and we're using that for power stations and everything. That would be carbon negative, and yet we would still need the Clean Air Acts, because you'd still get pea soup fog if you're burning giant kelp, or if you're burning coal, it makes no difference. And if you're burning instead of burning what we call petrol here or gas in the States. If we were burning, instead we were burning fuel made from giant kelp, again, we would need our catalytic converters and everything. So the clean air is totally independent. And this just, I mean, I didn't need to stop and think and rack my brain. I mean, the first second I saw that paragraph, I said, that's not what the climate change, what the Paris Agreement is about. That is clean air. And clean air is independent. I didn't have to go and research all that. I knew pretty much all of that already. I knew about the Peace Supers. I knew about the Clean Air Acts. And this was all just in 1 second. Just look at it, and you know all that. And that is the difference, I think. Just because I'm brought up as a mathematician, got a degree in maths, I've been very interested in science all my life since a child. I follow it with a scientific mind. And anyone with a scientific mind, then when you see something, you look at the scientific evidence, and it's just black and white, just like that. Just like that, no thought at all. You wouldn't even spend one eye blink of thought on writing a book like that if you have a scientific background. And yet these people who've spent years working on making the Paris Agreement come about, they go and write this book. It's very puzzling if you have a scientific mind. And I just say, well, it must be something to do with poetic thinking, is my word for it. Kind of imaginative, poetic, social thinking, which you can have that as well as the science background, but you could be very good on that and a very effective politician, but not be kind of have this instant click science, a way of seeing things. And I think that's what's going on. And this is giving me a little bit more kind of sympathy for the journalists and all the clickbait stories that they've written since 2018. Perhaps they don't have that instant click science way of seeing things. And that could explain how they can go to these press conferences with the IPCC and come away and write these articles that are literally nothing to do with what the scientists say. They just completely misunderstand the science so often. Like I've got so many examples in my fact-checking. It's been absolutely awful this last year, but I think that may be what's going on. Another thing they talk about in this future, in this story, and so just talk about a few more of these things. More moisture in the air. Regional capital cities in Bangladesh, Mexico, the United States and elsewhere have suffered brutal infrastructure destruction and extreme flooding, killing many thousands, displacing millions. Again, in the world without the Paris Agreement. If you have been following the science, then a very fast increase in sea level rise would be a centimetre a year. At the moment it's millimetres a year. That will get you to a metre, or maybe a little bit more than a metre by 2100. That is not a rate that could suddenly raise the sea so high that suddenly you get destructive flooding of New York. Just because the sea has risen a metre that year or something, it doesn't work like that. The sea rises by maybe a centimetre, then no way they're going to just sit around in New York, say, oh look, it's getting higher and higher, we're not going to do anything. And this was from the Ocean and Cryosphere Science Report, and they did this. And this shows the effect of high emission scenarios. So without this is business as usual, very high emissions. And I think I can't remember. But anyway, yes, very. I'll double check things, but this is yes. Oh yes, RCP 8.5. That's business as usual. That is increasing the amount of emissions from coal fivefold by 2100. Even then, you just get in the orange range, which is moderate for resource-rich coastal cities, like the ones they're talking about. Even for large tropical deltas and urban atoll islands, they're the ones that have really had a high emission scenario. Then they've got to have it very difficult for them. But this is New York, and then this is if you build in resilience in advance. Then it's almost nothing, even right up to high emissions. That pale yellow is between moderate and undetectable if you build in resilience, which of course they would do. So building in resilience, again, is nothing at all to do with whether you're doing the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement involves resilience, but that's not what the Accord is about. The Accord is about reducing CO2 emissions, And as part of it, it also encourages building in resilience through the Green Climate Fund, but you can do that without the Accord, and surely would. There would certainly be some degree of that. And as you see there, yellow, impact risks are detectable and attributable to climate change with at least medium confidence. That is what would happen with sea level rise. If you've got resilience is about equivalent to that. If you build in resilience at low emissions, then it's detectable that we will be having flooding that is due to the sea level rise. And what else did they do? And this thing, you try not to think about the 2 billion people who live in the hottest parts of the world, who for upwards of 45 days per year, temperatures skyrocket to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, a point at which the human body cannot be outside for longer than about 6 hours, because it loses the ability to cool itself down. This is, again, not understanding the science. It's not the temperature that matters. It's a combination of temperature plus humidity. And the temperature plus humidity is 35. You can't withstand much above 35 degrees centigrade with 100% humidity. That's blood temperature. Blood temperature isn't 60 degrees centigrade, it's 35. You can withstand very high temperatures if you can sweat. So, again, they just didn't get the science. Don't seem to have understood the science. And what's more, that doesn't happen at 3C. This thing where 45 days a year, point where you can't be outside for more than 6 hours, it's just not true. At about 4 degrees centigrade rise, and the hottest paddy fields in China reach the point where in the very hottest heat waves you can't be outside in the paddy fields where the air is very moist. But you can be indoors, can't be outside for more than 6 hours without some artificial means to cool yourself down from the heat. And this doesn't happen before 4 degrees C. The reason is that as the air gets more moist, then you get more clouds. So parts of the world, everywhere gets a bit hotter on average, not everywhere but most places, and the deserts get a little bit hotter, but they're also very dry. And the air in some places gets drier, feels drier, even though there's more moisture in the air, because the air is warmer. And then in the places where the humidity is quite high, then you get lots of cloud, and the cloud cools down the surface. And you just don't get that combination of high humidity and high temperatures before 4 degrees centigrade. And they're describing a 3 degrees world, and they just got that wrong. Never run that past a scientist. And they may have got confused by the global risk of deadly heat, which is an article, very misleading story in National Geographic. Perhaps they got some of this from the mainstream media rather than from the scientists. Because this seemed to be, you think National Geographic would explain things properly, but they didn't. This global risk of deadly heat was about heat waves that already affect 30% a year. And these are heat waves that can be, that are very young and the fit. It's not just them, these are heat waves that only the very elderly and babies kept in, you wouldn't leave a baby in a car with the window shut. An athlete would have to make sure to drink water, not run without drinking water. And it's people not used to the high temperatures especially. Nobody needs to die in these when talk about deadly heat. This was a technical term and referred to heat waves in which 1 in 10,000 would die if they don't take precautions. But if they take precautions, nobody dies. And that is the 3 degrees C. It's not going to be worse than that. It's not going to get as bad as that you can't survive until 4 degrees C. When I talk about that, they say, and now there are few forests left. Most of them are either logged or consumed by wildfire, and the permafrost belching greenhouse gases. But that's not true at all either. The forests are independent of the Paris Agreement again. Again, it's a thing that Trump says. Trump says, oh, we are great on forests, as if that's all the Paris Agreement was about. And he talks about how, he gave assistance to Brazil when lots of forests was being cut down last summer. He said, this is me doing what we need to be doing. No need to do anything about CO2, we're dealing with the forests. It's a complete misunderstanding. Forests are important for the Paris Agreement, but only when you get to the last few percent. So only a few percent of the CO2 emissions can be offset by forests. We can't offset everything by forests. It's just not feasible, it's not enough. Not enough forests. There's some things you might be able to do. The ways of soil sequestration, is sequestering CO2 in the soil, and some people think that if you roll that out really big time, and did lots of biochar and lots of other things, that could offset huge amounts of CO2. But you can't do it just by growing forests. And if you burnt all the forests, if you burnt every single tree in the world, it only add a little bit to the CO2 in the atmosphere. It's because the CO2. So it's very important to reduce the emissions from human emissions. We can't do it just with trees. It is very, very important, and they so muddle and confuse it by suggesting it's all about trees. Trees are important for the last little bit as you get down to zero emissions, but they're not what the Paris Agreement is all about. You can't do it just with trees. And we don't face a future without forests. The forests are growing throughout Europe and increasing. They're increasing in China, mainly because they're doing these big things to use to encourage it. With the increasing CO2 emissions, then the forests we do have are greening. We can see this from satellite photos, that the extra CO2 in the atmosphere and the slightly warmer conditions are beneficial to trees, and they produce more leaf cover. And as it gets very warm, at about 3 degrees C, then even without logging, then parts of the Amazon will turn to savanna, which is a mixture of grassland and shrubs and some trees. If you look at the natural processes and ignoring the logging, and but the other trees in other parts of the world, like northern in high altitudes in Europe, the trees will like the warmer moisture conditions. The main change there is a transition from conifers to deciduous trees, but still the forests are there. And then very far north you get more wildfires, so it's a kind of, people argue either way. That's where you get more forest or less forest when you get up into the Arctic regions in a warming world. And if we're around to fight the wildfires, we can help to make it tip in the direction to, since we are around, and depending on our decision, then we can fight the wildfires. And same in Australia, we can fight the wildfires. We can, even in a warming world, we can reduce the fuel load beneath the trees. We can do frequent burning of small bits of it, which can then encourage a lot of bush and some long patches of larger, more forest and so on. And then, so even in Australia, there's no reason why it has to go towards. We can reverse a lot of things, reverse deforestation, stop desertification for the semi-arid regions, and then some arid regions it's more favourable. And for instance, people argue either way, but this band of sub-Saharan Africa, then as it gets a bit warmer, then it may actually get a little bit damper. And there's a natural cycle according to which the entire Sahara Desert, over periods of thousands of years, greens. And then it goes desert again, then it goes greens, and then it goes desert again. And it's possible that a little bit of greening will happen just due to the warming and the changing of climate patterns. But people argue both ways, and it could be that the drying out effects kind of offset that. But anyway, there's a big plan which is underway of growing lots and lots of trees and other useful and agriculture and pasture land over this big green area there. And this is where you have the potential to green sub-Saharan Africa. And again, if we want to stop the CO2 emissions, they make a huge difference, they make everything much easier. But we can do this in any scenario. It's not enough to stop. It's not enough. But even if high emission scenario, we can still work on this sort of thing. It's not enough. We're on 3 degrees C, and the many things we would like to stop, like especially this total destruction of the corals, it makes everything so much, all these different resilience things we have to do, so much more expensive. It's a big hit on GDP if we have fast global warming, because there's so much work needed to be done to build into resilience and build all the flood barriers for all the cities and so on. And there are much more likely chance of effects on ecosystems. But we can still grow enough food for everyone, and the two things are independent. And it would be such a shame to lose a large area of the Amazon to savanna, and a great shame to lose the corals, and the changing of the climate patterns in the Himalayas and in India and in China. There's loads of reasons, and more wildfires in Australia, there's loads of reasons to stop well below 3 degrees C and well below 2 degrees C if we can manage it. But it's not because of the forest. Not only, we can do reforestation, reverse desertification, all the way up to 3 degrees and beyond. So that's another major confusion there. And melting permafrost, they say, releasing ancient microbes. This is just that's not very well established at all. The ancient microbes are most diseases, like viruses. Most viruses just wouldn't survive being. There's some giant viruses that do survive being frozen, but they're not diseases of humans. And most ancient microbes, again, the microbes that we're not going to get the plague or something from, very unlikely, because it needs human body. But and it comes from animal hosts, living animal hosts, not frozen ones. But some things do survive for great long periods of time, and that's anthrax is a very remarkable example of a microbe that can survive and still be hazardous to humans after freezing for thousands of years. And that happens from time to time, some frozen reindeer unthaw. But anthrax is easily treated by modern antibiotics. And any microbe that's been frozen for thousands of years is going to have zero resistance to modern antibiotics. So again, I mean, this is not a major concern. Although there have been some scare media stories about it, which maybe they went by, but it's not in the science reports. They said that the demise of the human species will be discussed more and more. For many, the only uncertainty is how long we'll last, how many more generations will see the light of day. It's absolutely incredible that you would see that in some people involved in the architecture of the Paris Agreement. This is business as usual. And remember, that's 5 times as much coal burning as we have today by 2100. Continue and burning fossil fuels at high levels all the way to 2200. And this is how long it takes before all the ice in Greenland melt. On no emissions, you will hardly see any difference at all. How could they think that even this world is too hot for humans? If it's not too hot for humans, how is it supposed to make us extinct? Unless it's supposed to be all this, the acrid fumes from the pea supers, or the these ancient microbes or something. They're not going to do it, because as I just explained. And just to explain, like the acrid fumes from pea supers, I mean, actually, you can actually smell it. I live on the Isle of Mull in Scotland, and there's a road just 100 metres away from me, and I don't smell the traffic fumes here. And if I go down to the road, the car goes past, I'll smell it. Traffic fumes like that, they're very, very limited. They are, it matters in the city, but it doesn't matter if you're just a little bit out. And if you're in a place with lots of small villages and they all have their cars, you'll still smell the petrol fumes out in the countryside. But and the acid rain does matter, but it wasn't a kind of health hazard for humans in that sense. We just don't produce enough of this stuff to change the atmosphere in such a way as to affect human health, not the atmosphere of the planet as a whole. And we don't reduce the oxygen. If you look at the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's 0.04%, and compare that with the amount of oxygen, and if you were to take oxygen out of the atmosphere by burning carbon dioxide, to make a significant effect, you have percentages of carbon dioxide. We can't grow that Oh, I'll answer that in a minute. Oh, I know what it is. It's not important. It's not me. So anyway. Oh, I'm sorry. Just a minute.
Yeah, no problem.
Right. So maybe I better stop here now. So I'll end this video now. I think I've said enough. I hope this helps all of you. Yeah. So just a reminder that my Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked, so that if you are very scared by things like this, to remember to join my Facebook group, our Facebook group, and you can help us, we can help you. And do subscribe to my YouTube video channel for more videos like this. And I hope it helped. I'll stop this here and I'll upload it when it's finished.